Bonjour, good morning, good day. My name is Jean Lebel and I am the president of the International Development Research Center. Je suis Jean Lebel, le président du Centre de recherche pour le développement international. IDRC, as many knows you, is quite pleased and happy to participate in the INGSA Global Week of Dialogue. Normally INGSA meets face-to-face. We are meeting virtually in this Global Week of Dialogue for us as part of the community of scientists that care about public policy to reflect, debate, find new ways and innovation to solve the most pressing problem we are seeing in the world. It's important for us to have the space in this time of pandemic, and I want to thank the organizer as well as the sponsor of the event for being quite creative and innovative and having a full week of dialogue together on science and policy. Everyone sees that the situation is quite dramatic in our own country or in other country. It evolves fast beyond sometimes our own understanding. In these times of difficulty globally, it's time also to have sound practice, sound approach, and be driven by action, sound action, rather than only rhetorical issues. We have to come together. We always say this in science, but even more so now, as it is impossible to solve this problem without collaboration of many different scientific fields and many different sectors of society. IDRC has initiated right at the beginning outreach to many organizations to first secure that everyone was safe and healthy. We are also developing a very pragmatic approach to our programming. We launched back in April, a program, Think COVID, that is looking at what will be the aftermath of this pandemic in the global south, sponsoring directly think tank and research organization to start reflecting with national authorities and developing solutions, whether they are economic, social, or environmental. In that line of thought, we also provided support to the African Science Granting Councils. They are themselves putting, research programs together that meet the needs of their individual, countries, but also give the opportunity to the researcher to do the research that they want in order to find lasting solutions. We're not doing this alone. Many have joined. I can say the Swedish, I can say the Brits, and many others that I forgot, and my apologies for that. And you, scientists and lead of organizations that support science, are also doing your part in this story. It's quite important. So let's take the opportunity this week of this global dialogue to also find minutes to engage in separate conversation one-on-one to discuss the progress or the challenge we are facing. In the next years, it will be even more important than it is now to have the voice globally of everyone at the table. And for IDRC, it's always important to have the voice of the global south at the table. And this partnering with INGSA has been giving us the opportunity to reinforce this message, but it has given us the opportunity also to all of you to participate in this global debate. We need extremely good quality, high quality research. We need to share the finding. We need to make it available to the global world. And the most important aspect of it is we need to find a way also to bring it to the attention of the decision maker and the policy maker that are struggling on the day-to-day with the consequences of this pandemic, which are ultimately affecting all of us. Alors, merci à tous pour votre travail. C'est un plaisir pour moi de vous souhaiter la meilleure des rencontres virtuelles de dialogue. It is a true pleasure to be here with you. I wish you all the best in your journey, and IDRC stands ready to support. Merci beaucoup. À très bientôt. Au revoir.
So first of all, we'd like to thank you very, very much, Dr. Swaminathan. So we are very happy to have you as kind of the VIP speaker of the week, of the INGSA Global Week of Dialogue. A lot of it, of course, will be related to the pandemic, but we're very, very happy that you agreed to participate to the opening of that week. And maybe my first question for you will be a little bit about your background and how do you become a WHO Chief Scientist?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Remi, and thanks for this opportunity. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to really talk about science to people who care about science, especially at this time of the pandemic. So I'm a pediatrician from India, and very early on in my life, I knew that I wanted to focus on research, which was a bit of an unusual career path for someone who also loves clinical work. So after my training in the US and the UK, I went back to India and started working at the Tuberculosis Research Center in Chennai, in South India. So most of my research work has been on TB and TB HIV. And then in 2015, I was appointed as the Director General of the Indian Council of Medical Research, which is the national research funding body like the Canadian Institutes of Health Research or like the NIH. The ICMR has about 30 intramural institutes, and it also does a lot of the extramural funding for medical research. And then in 2017, when Dr. Tedros became the Director General of the World Health Organization, he invited me to join him as his deputy. And so I did, because I thought it was a wonderful opportunity. And then we went through this process of what we call transformation, which was really an internal process led by staff that where we tried to reflect on how we should position WHO to look forward. WHO was 70 years old in 2018, and we said now we need to look, are we fit for purpose for the 21st century or not? And that resulted in a number of changes, one of which was the creation of the science division. And then Dr. Tedros actually invited me or asked me if I could be the chief scientist of the organization. And again, I thought that was a wonderful opportunity. It really suited my background and my interests. And also it was a challenge to take something on new and really develop it and set a path for the future. So that's how now, I guess I'm about 1.5 years into this new position. And we've created the science division, and I can talk a little bit more about that if you're interested.
This is great. So were you influenced, WHO was influenced by other chief scientist position in the world, like in the UK, in Canada, New Zealand, INGSA, or you did it from scratch?
No, absolutely. I think we were influenced because one of the things we were looking around to see is what are the good practices or the benchmarks. Both other UN organizations, other large global health bodies. Of course, there's nothing exactly comparable to WHO, but then, as you say, also the science advisors that countries have, governments have. And the reason really for the science division was, I can tell you, was twofold. One was to stay ahead of the curve, to be on top of technological and scientific advances globally in different disciplines that could then be leveraged to impact global health, and also to be responsive, or rather proactively responsive to these technological advances. I give you an example of gene editing, which of course, was in the headlines about 1.5 years ago after the experiments on human embryos. And we had already started thinking about having a committee, a global committee that would look at gene editing. As it turned out, we did set up a committee which will make some recommendations this year, not just to look at the biomedical aspects, or the pure science, but also to look at the ethical, legal, and social implications of these new technologies, and to come up with some guidance or regulatory frameworks even, for member states or countries to use. Similarly, for artificial intelligence, we have now a committee that's looking more into the social and ethical aspects of the use of AI, particularly in health, and what some of the good practices may be, what some of the red lines could be, and again, what the regulatory frameworks could look like. So that's an example of where the science division needs to constantly be looking ahead and contributing. And the other major focus is on our norms and standards work, because WHO is a normative agency. A lot of countries depend on WHO guidance for both public health as well as for clinical practice. And so it's extremely important that we are not only use the most that we're not only scientifically absolutely on top of the evidence, but also that we are relevant, useful, and that we do our guidance in ways in which we make it easy, both for ministries of health, but also for individual practitioners to use. So in other words, moving into the digital age. So these were some of the responsibilities that the science division was given, and that's how then we went ahead and set ourselves up.
Very good. So maybe just a little bit more, you mentioned proactively active. So basically you want to be ahead of the curve. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, so we've set up a unit which is called the Foresight Unit. It's still in its infancy. And again, I know that many governments have units like that, which advise them on big global trends. What are the things that are going to impact? And for us, most importantly, is health. And of course, we want to be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Now, there are going to be a number of factors which will impact on health. It's not just, things which happen within ministries of health, but it's all of these other big global trends, urbanization and globalization, and of course, climate change, and the impact that that's going to have on food, on nutrition, on air pollution. All of these risk factors or determinants of health, as we call them, were things we feel that we need to pay much more attention to. And health is one of those things which I think the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, Amina Mohammed, often refers to it as the anchor point, or the mooring station really for all the SDGs, because all of them influence health and health influences all of them. And so that's why I think we said we have to be very broad. In fact, we just put out a call for a science council, which will advise the Director General on some of these issues that we just talked about, the big global trends, where WHO has done well, where we really should be looking into much more, and sort of create a interdisciplinary group of top world scientists to advise the WHO on the way forward. So we're looking forward to receiving some really high quality applications for that Science Council.
This is great. Of course, it's a huge mandate and a lot of challenges. Maybe before asking you a bit more about the pandemic, before the pandemic, when you started as a chief scientist, typical day, how was a typical day for you? How did it look? And was it what you expected when you took the job?
So it started with a blank slate. So in a way, it was very good, because we needed to create the architecture and also the vision and mission for this division. From the beginning, we had a few clear principles. The first one is that this would be a cross-cutting department. So because we don't want to become another silo. And really our work can only be successful if we're working across the organization and beyond. So both within WHO, but also externally, like INGSA and groups like that, really connecting with the chief scientists of other UN agencies, with the International Science Council and so on, with the academy, the inter-academy partnership, which is a partnership of 130 science academies. So from the beginning, we had that vision. Internally, we have to be cross-cutting. Externally, we have to be engaging with many different groups. Secondly, we said we have to be an enabling function. So we, of course, some people might look at us as a policing function, but really we would like to be seen as an enabling function where we set the standards and we expect people to follow the standards. An example is, how do you do expert consultations when you're doing a guideline development? So we got a lot of inputs. We had these expert groups which told us, okay, but you need to have all stakeholders consulted, including patient groups, including civil society representatives. It's not enough to just have the so-called experts in the fields, in the room. So, okay, so we have an SOP on how you do expert consultations, an SOP on how you do decision making when you have a guideline development group. Another one on the kind of processes, systematic reviews and others which would need to be done leading up to the development of a guideline. And also on the research side, how do you do research prioritization, for example? Every technical department was doing it in a slightly different way. So of course, it's WHO's bread and butter is guidelines and norms and standards. But there wasn't this unit that would make sure that there was a consistency of approach and a standardized methodology which enabled everyone to live up to the same high standards. And what we found was that we did not have this quality assurance mechanism earlier. It's a big task because we produce hundreds of documents every year. But one of the things we're trying to do is reduce the quantity, improve the quality, and really link it to the needs which are coming from our countries. We have country offices in about 150 countries across the world. And so when we talk to our country office heads and their staff and say, which guidelines do you really need? What is it that you need to improve your work on the ground? And which of the ones we are doing are sort of irrelevant or not really used by you? So we did a lot of analysis into which of our guidance documents have been most popular and why. And then the third piece of work is around the digital health. So we created 3 new departments: the quality assurance of norms and standards, the research for health department, which is also around methods and facilitating high quality research on the right topics. And the third one was digital health and innovation, which really looks at how do you use these new digital tools and technologies to improve the delivery of healthcare. And of course, in the pandemic, this aspect has received a huge amount of attention because as we are speaking now, a lot of work has moved to online, but it's also resulted in the realization that there are people who will be left out. There are digitally excluded populations. I understand almost 3.6 billion people do not have access to the internet. And so that means you're leaving behind for health, for education, for other services, half the world's population. So that's a real worry for me personally. And how do we bridge that gap?
So can you tell us a little bit more about that? How do you bridge that gap? The one that are left out, half of the world left out because of not having access to internet, and especially during the pandemic, all the issue related to that?
I think the first thing is to make sure that we realize this fact and put it at the top of our list of things to address. Solutions have to be found. I mean, I don't think we can, I could bring up a solution just now, but it's by discussing collectively. So we've been working with most of the big technology companies over the last few months because they've all been involved both in helping us with the response, but also in helping us with information sharing and the infodemic that we've seen. So we have the tech companies, we have the countries. We have set up a digital health technical advisory group of about 25 people that again come from public sector, private sector, civil society, some of them with a lot of experience in rolling out digital health in their own countries to advise the WHO on how this should move. And there's a lot of interest from member states. So this year we have a digital health strategy that's going to our World Health Assembly, which was postponed because of the pandemic, and will be hopefully approved in November. And that digital health strategy actually puts forward a 10-year vision for where we want to go. And there's a path on how we can get there. It will mean investments. It will mean investments in infrastructure. So obviously to get internet to those, last mile people, but it can be done. Many countries have shown that it can be done. And even the very poor now in many countries are benefiting from these digital tools. So it's a question of having the will and finding the resources, and for governments to prioritize that this needs to be done. And as I said, it impacts both education, as we've seen now with online education. A huge number of children are being left out of that, the disadvantaged, coming from disadvantaged communities, and the same thing would apply to health as well. So it's a serious issue, and we have to find collectively a solution for this.
This is not critically important for sure, and hopefully a country like Canada will be able to help all these initiatives. Now, moving maybe more into the pandemic, what has been your role up to now into the management of the pandemic at the level of WHO?
Thank you for that question. I mean, we've had an absolutely central role in this. And in fact, a lot of people have said that Dr. Tedros's vision to create a science division came just in time, for this pandemic, because of a couple of things. The first one was what I was talking about, our guideline making processes. Now, in a pandemic, you're under a lot of pressure to put out guidance. Countries are, knocking at the door, hammering at the door, saying, what do you say about transmission? What do you say about this? What do you say about that? So we cannot take our time. Normally we take, maybe 6 months to put out a guideline because you go through all of these steps. Here we cannot afford to take that. We have to do it in days or weeks. And at the same time, we have to be confident that our guidance is based on the best possible data and evidence that we can find. So we very quickly brought together a group, mainly of WHO staff volunteering their time to do rapid reviews. So they scan the literature every day. And as you know, the literature on this has just been, exponentially growing. It's we started, of course, with China producing quite a lot in the early days, but then it went to something like 500 on some days, publications a day. And then you have preprints, and which you have to evaluate, and then you have the regular peer-reviewed literature. You have a lot of news items. So this group was in charge of looking at that every day and coming up with rapid reviews on different topics, and that's constantly updated. So it's like a living rapid review. And then we also engaged with a large number of organizations around the world, about, I think, something like 60 or 70 organizations, like the Cochrane Collaborative, but various other agencies with also part of our Goan network. We have a network which is the group that responds to emergencies and brings in a lot of resources. These people, we've all brought them together to say, okay, let's have a call every month and share what each one is doing to avoid duplication and improve efficiency, and perhaps bring our work together onto a common platform where people can search. So we have living systematic reviews on our website that the Cochrane collaboration is helping us with on therapeutics, and we're going to extend that to vaccines as well. So what we did was really to make sure that we are on top of the scientific literature, and that is feeding into the guidance documents that are being produced, on a regular basis and are updated. The other area we focused was on the research and the science, because we realized early on the solutions have to come from science. And so on February 11th and 12th, we convened a research forum. We hosted a research forum, a global research forum, where we had very strong representation from Canada, from the CIHR, and some universities, and many other countries. We had about 400 scientists, and we then divided ourselves into 9 working groups that took up different thematic areas which were important, and developed a research roadmap which highlighted all the research priorities. At that point of time, we knew very little about this new virus. And then we reconvened in July to take stock of what we've learned, to share knowledge, and then to say, okay, what are the priorities going forward? There are still so many questions we have. And so that's been really useful. And we had 1,300 scientists really joining this virtual forum in July. Amazing, from all around the world. It worked so well. It's amazing how this online technology has actually served us so well. And now we have, of course, a lot of work going on therapeutics, vaccines, and diagnostics through the partnership that's been created, the ACT Accelerator, but also on things like ethics, social and behavioral science, infection prevention and control, the animal origins of this infection, and on epidemiology and transmission and so on. And we developed a number of core research protocols that we put on our website for countries to use, whether it's on seroepidemiological studies or how you do household contact investigations, or even on a core protocol for a therapeutics trial, for an adaptive clinical trial design. So all of that, I think, really helped to mobilize, and WHO got into the center of mobilizing scientists. And I think that's been one of the best experiences of this pandemic, has been that global collaboration and willingness to share and willingness to work together that we've seen between scientists.
Well, this is great, and what you mentioned, the solution will come, or is coming from science. I cannot agree more. And you mentioned as well, everything is moving so fast. That's the difference with the usual. So there, you have to provide, give advice almost on a daily basis. It must have been quite challenging at WHO. And maybe you mentioned that a little bit, but when you have contradictory evidence, like for example on some drug treatment, hydroxychloroquine and others. How do you manage that? Because some part of the world will say yes, other will say no. You have to take stock and give advice. How do you do that?
Yeah, so that's very good question, because this is exactly the kind of situation where we have to be able to stand up and say, we rely on the best evidence. One of the strange things that's happened this time in the pandemic is the release of scientific data by press release. And we've seen, even top institutions going to the press rather than going into the standard, peer-reviewed publication process. And that becomes a bit of a challenge, because people are waiting for solutions. The whole world is waiting. Press is waiting, So the moment there's something out, either in a press release or in a preprint, it's picked up by the media and it's amplified. And some of this is good science and some of it is not good science, and that only comes out when you have the process of peer review and you have other scientists looking at the data. So this is what happened, I think, with hydroxychloroquine and one or two other things, is that there was so much media hype, I would say, and it also became political in some countries, that sort of distracted people from what was actually the evidence base, which was very limited at that time. And since then, of course, there have been many randomized trials. So one of the things we've again been advocating for is, let's test things which are promising, but let's do it through properly conducted and robust randomized trials, which give you the evidence on efficacy and safety. Observational studies can hint at things, they can provide you initial some ideas, but it's only randomized trials which give you the definitive answer, and that too if they're large enough. So there are 4,500 clinical trials today registered in the WHO's clinical trial registry platform. But if you look at the size of these and the questions that they've been able to answer, you can count on one hand the trials which have actually given you a definitive answer. And I'm very happy that the WHO Solidarity trial is one of them, one of the largest in the world. Currently, we have close to 10,000 patients enrolled across 27 countries and 450 hospitals, and dozens of investigators involved. So this is truly a global collaboration. The other one, of course, is the UK's recovery trial, which also has a large number, over 11,500 enrolled. So those are the kind of trials you need to rapidly answer questions, but also robustly answer them. And so I think we've learned, we've got the data on hydroxychloroquine now from these two trials, and also on some of the other drugs like lopinavir, ritonavir, Currently, we are the largest trial, I think, looking at remdesivir and its impact on mortality, and hopefully we should have those results fairly soon. So just underlines the need for properly done studies. And again, sometimes you need global collaboration because we've seen the epidemic, shifting. So trials which started in one country then ran out of patients, which because, good for them, they controlled the outbreak, but then the study could not be completed. Whereas if you have a multi-country, multi-centric trial, then you can still ensure that you're enrolling in some part of the world.
Yep. Well, that's good. And so if I summarize what you just said, also, so science and scientists would probably have to learn from the pandemic and change some of the practice, like going to the press right away and all that. So open science is very good, but also you have to be careful about the quality of the data that are released.
And also, I think media, journalists, some of them are excellent. I mean, I've really been impressed with the quality of science journalism that's happened. But again, those are a handful of, really journalists who take their work very seriously and do a lot of research before they report. Majority of the mainstream media is just putting out headlines, based on what they've seen. And that confuses people. And people then make a conclusion that the scientists don't know what they're doing. Because one day, you see one thing, the next day you see another thing. And people should understand that science is incremental, that it evolves, it does change. You don't find the solution on day one, right? And you need a series of studies before you come to a conclusion. So I think it's important to educate the public also on the scientific process and the fact that scientists do disagree with each other. And there should be a scientific debate on everything. And ultimately the data, will tell us what is the truth. But I think if you don't have that understanding, you could very well think that, scientists have got it all wrong and that we are confusing the public.
Yeah, that's a key issue that will be discussed, I'm sure, quite a bit over the next little while. Maybe a question about vaccine and the role of WHO development of vaccine, but probably more importantly, the distribution, the access to the vaccine when we'll have them. Is WHO a bit concerned about distribution, access for the global south and all that?
Definitely, that's one of our major concerns because of the past experiences of other pandemics like H1N1, where there was a huge issue of distribution of the vaccine as well as the drugs. So that's why we started discussing with countries and with partners and with private sector about how it should work this time. And we've come up with something called the fair allocation mechanism, which has been discussed by all our member states, several rounds of discussion. And as you know, there's this COVAX facility which is being set up by Gavi, which would be a pooling mechanism, both pooling of risk and pooling of procurement. So what we would like to do is to be able to invest in several different vaccine candidates and platforms. This is CEPI, WHO, and Gavi working together as a COVAX, so that you minimize your risk. You know that some of these candidates are likely to be successful. And then also, if you have a known demand, you can negotiate better with companies. They can plan better how many doses they are going to produce. The cost is likely to be lower when you're procuring large volumes. So for all these reasons, we hope that the high-income countries will elect to join this COVAX facility. We know that many countries are also making bilateral deals with companies because they feel that they have a responsibility to their own citizens. That's fine. You could do that and also be part of COVAX. We need to raise several $1 billion before the end of the year in order to make this work, because you have to invest in manufacturing, you have to invest in scaling, you have to invest in technology transfer in order to have the billions of doses. So our goal is to have 2 billion doses by the end of 2021, which isn't much, but it's enough to distribute to the whole world to at least cover their priority groups. They could be frontline workers, healthcare workers. Countries will decide which of their citizens should be vaccinated first if you have a limited supply. So we're hoping that these 2 billion doses will at least be able to cover that group of people. And then, of course, by 2022, we should have a much better supply of vaccines, hopefully. So far, the immunogenicity data that we are seeing is looking good. But until the phase 3 trials are done, we don't know which of these vaccines are going to be really efficacious and safe. But it's very encouraging, and we can be optimistic because of the number of vaccine development programs that are in place now, over 30 candidates in clinical development, which is, I think, really unprecedented. And so there's been a huge investment in this, both by private sector and public sector, which should give us a couple of vaccines at least that are good.
Very good. So we're moving toward the end, maybe a couple more questions. Over the past few months, we of course learned quite a lot about the virus. We learned quite a lot about the engagement of various communities to fight the virus. If you had to do it again, what will you do differently? Have we learned from that? What WHO will do differently? Is there enough capacity internally at WHO to be able to move forward quickly? What about what government did at the global level? Should they change the way they did things? How to improve so that we are able to fight the next pandemic more efficaciously?
No, I think that's a very good question. And I think one must always learn and do better next time. And in retrospect, I'm sure we will find that there are things we could have done better, even though you're trying your best, at the time. When you look back, you always find a couple of things you could improve on. And that is why now the Director General has announced the setting up of the independent panel that will look at the pandemic response. And Her Excellencies Helen Clark and Ellen Sirleaf-Johnson are co-chairing that panel, and they are in the process of setting up how they're going to function, selecting the other panel members, and we'll get to work very soon in September. The report is expected in May next year. So I think that will be quite a high-level overview of the response, not just WHO, but the global response to the pandemic, what went well and what didn't go so well. In addition, we're also looking to review our own international health regulations, because these are the rules which were made by member states and which are adhered to by countries, which actually tell people what to do in the case of a pandemic. And there are certain rules and regulations that you need to follow, and certain things WHO has to do, certain things the countries have to do. So we're also reviewing those regulations, because those were made in 2005, and we feel that it's time to look at how, again, is there a change needed, for example, in those regulations. And I think that would be useful also, because, as you know, one of the things that we've been asked about is the declaration of the public health emergency of international concern. It's a yes or a no, it's a binary. And the feeling is that it should not be binary, but perhaps there should be a graded emergency grading, so that you can have different levels, and you can put in place different restrictions or rules at different levels. So those are the kind of, so we'll have the international health regulations reviewed. We'll also have the big pandemic response reviewed, and hopefully that will tell us what we need to do for preparedness and response and prevention for the future. Right now, of course, we're focused on this pandemic. We need to get out of this pandemic as soon as possible with a vaccine, but also we mustn't forget that to vaccinate 60-70% of the world is going to take some time. Until then, we have to follow the measures that we know work. They're very difficult to follow, but the physical distancing, the masking, the hand washing, and all the other public health interventions that governments have put in place need to continue till we have that population level immunity to slow down this virus from spreading. But at the moment, majority of the world is still susceptible to this virus. And so it's going to keep on growing, I think, for the foreseeable future.
Well, now it's time to thank you very, very much for all the time and the advice and comments that you provide us this morning. I think it will be a great way for INGSA to start the Global Week of Dialogue. And certainly we look forward to interacting again with you in the near future. So encore une fois, merci beaucoup. Most appreciated on behalf of INGSA. And have a nice...
Merci. And one of the things I hope will change is that governments and politicians will listen to scientists, to public health specialists more, because I think we've seen that those countries that did that have done well. And I think that's key. And also building the confidence in science, with the public. That's something that we as the scientific community really need to discuss and have a strategy for. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I wish INGSA all the best in its deliberations.